The morning mist clung to the trees like a shroud, cold, heavy, and silent. Beneath it, thousands of armored French knights stood waiting, their breath rising as pale steam through the mud-choked air. A faint metallic rattle drifted down the line, gauntlets tapping shields, horses pawing the soil, men whispering prayers they hadn't needed yesterday. Across the narrow sodden field stood a smaller army, thin, exhausted, hollow-eyed. English longbowmen, mud-splattered and starved after weeks of retreat. They planted sharpened stakes into the earth, their movements rhythmic and calm, as if preparing for a ritual rather than a battle. No one, neither the proud nobility of France nor the weary soldiers of Henry V, knew that within the hour, this muddy corridor would become a graveyard. No one knew how quickly the French line, mighty and confident, would collapse under the weight of its own armor, its own ambition, and its own miscalculation. Agincourt was not meant to be a French defeat, but the mud had other plans.
By October 1415, the 100 Years' War had dragged on for nearly 8 decades. Henry V of England, young yet intensely disciplined, believed he possessed a rightful claim to parts of France. His invasion that summer had been bold but costly. After besieging Harfleur, disease tore through his army. Dysentery, fever, starvation. His retreat toward Calais was desperate, a long march through enemy territory with an army reduced to perhaps 6,000 men, many too weak to fight. Waiting for him were the French. They had assembled a massive force, possibly 15,000 to 20,000 men, though exact numbers vary in historical sources. What is certain is that their confidence was overwhelming. They were well-fed, well-rested, heavily armored, and positioned between Henry and safety. The French did not merely want victory. They wanted honor, ransom, glory, and the destruction of an invading English king. But the battleground they chose, or rather allowed by circumstance, was a narrow muddy funnel between two dense forests, Tramcourt and Agincourt Wood. This cramped field would crush their formation, suffocate their horses, drown their foot soldiers, and turn their glorious charge into a slow, grinding death march.
6 a.m. A pale, wet dawn. The battlefield lay silent except for a soft pattering of drizzle, thin, cold, and relentless. The mud grew heavier with each drop, clinging to boots, horses, and the iron-brown frames of the French vanguard. French knights cursed beneath their visors. Their armor alone weighed 25 to 30 kilograms. Now it was lacquered with thick clay, turning each movement into a struggle. Across the field, Henry V observed with a calm intensity. He rode a small but sturdy warhorse, pausing where the mud seemed deepest. According to historical accounts, he spoke quietly to his commanders. Here we hold, and God decide the rest. His longbowmen hammered their stakes into the ground, angled outward to impale charging horses. The thud of wood into earth echoed between the forests like a ritual heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. To the French, this sound was an insult. Peasants preparing to resist noble cavalry? But it was also a warning. The French confidence was enormous. French commanders believed the outcome was already certain. Their knights outnumbered the English. They were fighting on home soil. They believed that longbow arrows could not penetrate good plate armor. And on dry ground, they would have been right. But today was not dry, and the longbows would not aim for armor, but for horses' visors, gaps, and breathing holes. The bottleneck. The field was perhaps only 750 yards long and narrowed dangerously in its center. Narrow as a lane, according to some chroniclers.
For thousands of French men-at-arms, the formation was a disaster. The first line was packed shoulder to shoulder, the second line pressed forward behind them, the third line, restless nobles eager for ransom, pushed even harder. Movement became impossible, orders became muffled or ignored. Commanders shouted, but the sound evaporated in the damp wind. It was not yet a battle, but already the French army was suffocating under its own weight.
Henry knew the French wouldn't attack while the longbows held the advantage, so he made a dangerous move. He ordered his archers forward, closer to the French, into deadly range. As they marched, they uprooted their stakes and replanted them several dozen yards ahead. The French watched, stunned, as peasants advanced against them with calm defiance. An English archer later wrote that the mud sucked at their boots like hands trying to drag them down, but they kept moving. This sudden advance forced the French to react. They could not allow the English to dictate the distance. The first wave, French cavalry. Impatient and humiliated, French mounted knights prepared to charge. Their horses were restless, hooves sinking deep into the mud. A trumpet blared. The cavalry surged forward, but the field betrayed them instantly. Heavy war horses floundered, mud sprayed, hooves slipped. The formation shattered within seconds. Some knights toppled face first, crushed by the horses behind them. Others slogged forward, their mounts gasping and struggling for traction. Then the longbows sang. Henry knew the French wouldn't attack while the longbows held the advantage, so he made a dangerous move. He ordered his archers forward, closer to the French, into deadly range. As they marched, they uprooted their stakes and replanted them several dozen yards ahead. The French watched, stunned, as peasants advanced against them with calm defiance. An English archer later wrote that the mud sucked at their boots like hands trying to drag them down, but they kept moving. This sudden advance forced the French to react. They could not allow the English to dictate the distance. The first wave, French cavalry. Impatient and humiliated, French mounted knights prepared to charge. Their horses were restless, hooves sinking deep into the mud. A trumpet blared. The cavalry surged forward, but the field betrayed them instantly. Heavy war horses floundered, mud sprayed, hooves slipped. The formation shattered within seconds. Some knights toppled face first, crushed by the horses behind them. Others slogged forward, their mounts gasping and struggling for traction. Then the longbows sang, the sound of death. Thousands of arrows hissed through the air in a deadly black cloud. The sound was described as a vast tearing, as if the sky itself ripped open. Arrows thudded into horses, necks, chests, flanks. A wounded horse screamed, a high, terrible sound that rippled across the battlefield. Horses collapsed, rolled, or crashed into each other. Riders were thrown or trapped beneath their mounts. Armor that should have been their protection became a prison. Some knights drowned where they fell, their faces pressed into mud too deep to escape. The cavalry charge disintegrated before it reached the English line. The second wave, armored men at arms. Now the French infantry surged forward, thousands of heavily armored men marching directly into the same mud that had destroyed the cavalry. The weight of their armor dragged them down, sinking them ankle-deep, then shin-deep. Arrows rained down again. French armor could deflect many shafts, but the archers aimed at armpits, visors, joints, breathing holes, and especially the legs, where armor was weakest. Hundreds fell, but the men behind continued pushing. The French vanguard slowly crashed into the English center.
When the two lines collided, the French found themselves chest-deep in mud, exhausted, gasping, barely able to lift their weapons. The English, lighter and less armored, had the advantage of mobility. The front French ranks were so tightly packed they could not raise their arms, much less swing swords. Some accounts describe French knights crushed upright in their armor, unable to breathe. The pressure from behind was relentless. Nobles desperate for glory forced their way forward, squeezing the men in front into a suffocating wall of bodies. Imagine 1,000 armored men pressed into a narrow funnel, trapped between forests, sinking deeper with every step. There was no room to fight, no room to maneuver, no room to live. Meanwhile, English archers, having emptied their quivers, dropped their bows and charged into the melee with hatchets, mallets, knives, and lead hammers. They targeted fallen knights, those richest for ransom, or those who still posed a threat. The French line, suffocated from within and attacked from without, began to buckle.
Henry, personal combat. According to contemporary sources, Henry V himself fought in the front ranks, protecting his own brother from a French assailant. A French knight struck Henry's crown, denting it. Henry killed him. His presence electrified the English morale. Across the line, French soldiers realized, with horror, the English king himself was in the mud with them, and he was not losing. The collapse. The collapse was not dramatic. It was slow, quiet, almost gentle. French knights began sinking, unable to rise. Men suffocated beneath piles of bodies. Horses kicked helplessly before becoming still. Those in the middle ranks realized they could not move forward, backward, or sideways. Arrows struck them. Swords scraped their visors, mallets smashed their helmets. The French line crumpled like a wall of wet clay. Then panic spread. Retreat! Fall back! We are lost! But there was nowhere to go. The mud pulled at their legs like living hands. And behind them, more French troops, still advancing, crashed into the fleeing survivors. The field became a writhing, screaming swamp of bodies. The French army had broken.
By early afternoon, what had been an army was now a field of corpses. Henry ordered his men to secure prisoners, but when a fresh French cavalry detachment threatened the rear, he made a brutal decision, one recorded with shock by chroniclers of the time. He ordered the execution of many French prisoners to prevent an uprising behind his line. The screams carried across the field. The French morale evaporated completely. What remained of their forces fled into the woods. The mud swallowed the fallen. The English stood victorious, starved, bloody, shaking, but alive. The casualties were catastrophic, among the worst French losses of the entire Hundred Years' War. Dozens of high-ranking nobles were dead. The Constable of France, the Admiral of France, the Master of Crossbowmen, and countless knights whose names filled medieval chronicles. But the true tragedy was deeper. Agincourt shattered the unquestioned dominance of the French heavy cavalry. It destroyed the myth of chivalric invincibility. It proved that discipline, terrain, and preparation could defeat sheer numbers and noble lineage. And above all, it showed that even the mightiest army could be destroyed by its own arrogance and a field filled with mud.
Mud is a simple thing. Earth mixed with water. Yet, on that October morning, it shaped the fate of nations. The French believed honor alone would win the day. The English believed discipline and survival were enough. The field decided the rest. Agincourt was not won solely by longbows, nor lost solely by pride. It was a collision of decisions, miscalculations, exhaustion, and terrain. A moment when human ambition drowned in a tide of muck and rain. History remembers Agincourt as a miracle for the English, but for the French, it was a reminder written in blood. Sometimes the greatest enemy is not the army before you, but the ground beneath your feet.